Now, launched in 2007, Nigeria's Institute for National Transformation was birthed to develop leaders of integrity and exceptional organizational skills from both the public and private sectors. Vincent Anigbogu, Director General of the Institute for National Transformation, joins me to delve into ways to inspire positive change in the country. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Professor. Let's all start off this way. Tell us more about Nigeria's Institute for National Transformation.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Onyi. The Institute for National Transformation is actually a private initiative that was started in 2007 to bridge a gap. Let's just take a quick journey through history. We gained independence in 1960, October 1st, and we recently celebrated our 56th independence anniversary. And if you look at the vision of the founding fathers, the vision was to build a nation bound in freedom, peace, and unity, and to bequeath that nation to our children. Well, I think you can agree with me that 56 years later, yes, some progress has been made, and we must appreciate all our leaders, but there's much yet to be done. And leadership is the key issue here. John Maxwell, the very famous leadership guru, says that everything begins and ends with leadership. And it's true. So we started the Institute to begin to train our people in leadership principles. Nations are not built by chance, they are built by design. And even if you look at our national anthem, it contains the process, the mechanism by which we should build our nation. Number one, arise and build. Arise and serve. Serve with love, serve with heart, serve with mind. If you look at each of those components, they all point to dedicated and committed and competent service. It also talks about helping our youth to know the truth, that great lofty heights they should attain. I think in many ways we have failed to achieve that. And that's because as a nation we have never taken leadership development serious. And yet, it's the critical factor in the development of both organizations and nations. That's why we started the Institute. And I must say that we are not only in Nigeria, we have presence in other African nations.
Now, ever since the Institute was established in the year 2007, would you say it has made any significant difference in the style of leadership or even leadership across the public and private sectors?
I think we have made some dent, but there's much work to be done. We have had the privilege of training leaders in the military sector, in some of the government agencies, the universities, and we have received testimonies that those training have made much of a difference. In fact, a former minister told me that if he had gone through the Institute before he had taken up the position as a federal minister, he said he would have done far better because the training exposed him to a systematic approach to leadership and priorities. So I can say that, yes, we have made some impact, but there's much yet left to be made.
Do you think, it's a good thing you mentioned an example with one of the ministers, do you think that most political office holders or public office holders go through some form of leadership institute before being appointed? Is it something you think those in power really look out for? And is it something you think the country should begin to look out for before appointing anyone into any role of authority?
Ms. Oyi, before I answer you that, let me give you the result of a study that was done at Stanford University. That was about 11, 12 years ago. Professor Jim Collins studied the principles that take whether an organization or even a nation from an average status to excellence or great status. And this is what they found, that to lead an organization from good to greatness, one, you require what he calls a level 5 leader. Who is a level 5 leader? Somebody who is very competent, yet very humble. Somebody who has great ambition, not for personal gain, but for development of their organization or their nation. So having the right leader at the helm of affairs determines whether an organization or a nation can change. That's number one. Number two, they found out that for change to actually occur, not only must you have a level 5 leader, you must also have a very competent leadership team, each one bringing in expertise in their area so that they can bring innovation and creativity. Therefore, a good leader cannot change anything alone. He must have a competent and disciplined leadership team. Then the third thing they have found is that the leader and the competent team must now sit together and critically look at all the facts on ground, not sweeping anything under the rug, and assess the reality on ground. And then the next thing they do is to now carefully choose one or two or three of those issues that will give them a competitive advantage. So you can tell that leadership is not just appointing people. They must be competent. They must know why they are there. Because it's like playing an orchestra. You know, you can have the best conductor, but if the instrumentalist don't know what they're playing, that music will never come out well.
Now, talking about assessing the reality on ground, do we have those kind of leaders today in Nigeria?
Well, I must be honest, one of the things I admire about our current president is, for the first time, there's boldness in encountering corruption. We need that. People have just gone too far in playing around with the resources of the nation. We need strong and disciplined leader. But beyond that, we also need a competent leadership team that can chart a course. There is a vision, and that vision is to build a nation that's bound in freedom, peace, unity, and prosperity. So fighting corruption is good, but there is a vision we must also pursue. And that's what I will encourage that this administration begins to do, to pursue that bigger vision, which will eventually bequeath to our children.
My question is, when you have a situation like what's happening in Nigeria, where corruption has been entrenched, most people say it's second nature in the country at the moment. How does a leader play that role to the book and at the same time address these issues that many have described as beyond normal? How do you strike that balance?
First of all, I totally disagree with the notion that Nigeria is an exception. We are not an exception. A model for us to look at is Singapore. When Lee Kuan Yew came to power back in 1954 and subsequently in 1965, they were suffering the same social ills that our nation, Nigeria, is facing today. I mean, there were corruption, there were, insecurities, crimes, and what have you. But he took a leader and his team that crafted a long-term vision of where they wanted the nation to be. Number one, they wanted the nation to remain a multilingual, multicultural, multi-religious society where everybody has a fair opportunity to participate. Number two, they also decided that it will be a corruption-free society. Corruption will not be tolerated. Today, every one of those dreams they crafted has become a reality. Singapore is a corruption-free society. Singapore is a multicultural, multilingual, multi-religious society where all the different religious groups are coexisting in a prosperous nation. So Nigeria is not any different. The only difference between a Nigeria and a Singapore is that Singapore is 5 million, Nigeria is 170, 180 million. That means it will take longer time for us to achieve it, but it can be achieved. It can be achieved.
Okay.
And also, let me add this. Even as we are fighting corruption, there is a due process by which, of course, we can do that. It must be done transparently so that people don't feel that you're being high-handed or that you're favoring some people over others.
Interesting.
But must corruption be fought? It must be fought.
All right, then, Professor, that's a very interesting point you've just made. We're going to continue this discussion after the break. I've been speaking with Vincent Anigbogu, Director General of the Institute for National Transformation, to continue our discussion on inspiring change in Nigeria. My guest remains Vincent Anigbogu, Director General of the Institute for National Transformation. Thank you so much for staying with us, Vincent. Now, just before the break, we talked about the role leadership has to play in inspiring positive change in the country. My question now is it all about leadership? Again, there are those who say Nigeria's problem isn't really all about leadership. It's also about followership. What's your take?
It's correct. It's both. When we talk about leadership, we tend to focus just on the top national leadership. The truth is that everywhere you work, everywhere you serve, you are a leader there. So leadership starts from top and percolates down even to the bottom. But everyone must have a sense of responsibility that it takes all of us to build a nation. Therefore, and that's why I totally agree with the new campaign, Change Begins With Me. In fact, at the Institute, we've been propagating a similar campaign since 2014. That is, be the change that you want to see. Whatever you want to see in Nigeria, let it first start with you. Why is that? Study has shown that it takes 3 levels of, should I say, competence to change anything. Number 1, any change begins with disciplined people. People who are responsible, people who are hardworking, people who are people of integrity. In other words, you can't change anything without people of integrity. So we Nigerians must decide in this season that we want to change, that all of us will operate in integrity. Do you know integrity factor alone will change this nation overnight? If we all decide to do things honestly, no giving of bribes, but do things the right way.
Well, Professor, how easy is it going to be to drive home that message? Let's just begin to break things down, and that's the issue of followership I talked about earlier on. Recently, we had stories about the former First Lady of Nigeria and some monies found on her. And in a state like Rivers State, for instance, there was a protest. Those supporting her and those saying she's not the very first First Lady in power to make away with such amount of money. And they feel that, you know, it's some kind of witch hunt to begin with. When we also had the story of Diezani Alison Madueke as well, former Petroleum Minister of Nigeria, the social media went agog and said it was an attack. Now, if you listen to some groups, you will understand as well where their grievance comes from, in as much as it might sound ridiculous to some extent, but this is a belief that's entrenched. They say it's her turn. Why won't she take advantage of what comes her way? They say, how many others from different parts of the country have been called to order over monies they've also made away with? Now, in as much as someone, you might say, oh, this is just mere discussion. This is something that's really entrenched in most Nigerians. You understand that we are divided across ethno-religious lines in this particular country. Now, when such arguments come up, when there are those who say you have leaders in power who haven't gone through school, who haven't gone through leadership institutes, but are very wealthy in the country today, I ask myself, how easy will it be to change that perception, to allow, to make Nigerians understand that nothing justifies anyone making away with the country's resources or abusing power? How do you want to drive that message home, irrespective of where the person comes from?
I think those examples you have given are what I call the brutal facts of reality in Nigeria today. Over the course of 56 years, we have become a divided nation. We have not been fair with each other. And so anytime a particular group have access to power, the thinking is not, it's our opportunity to contribute to the building of the nation. Rather, the thinking is, it's our turn to eat. And when our turn to eat is over, we pass on the chance to another people. But I think the season has come as serious Nigerians to collectively agree, let bygone be bygone. But let's start implementing the principles that truly transform nation. Look at Singapore today. 4 or 5 different races, Indians, Chinese, Malays, and different people coexisting beautifully and living in affluence. I think when we can build an affluent society, many of these issues that divide us will vanish. They are really poverty-driven mentality. And I like what Lee Kuan Yew said. He said, when we took office, the first thing we had to do was to change the third world mentality of our people. These are examples of third world mentality.
Professor, whose responsibility is it to drive home this message? I hear what you're saying. It's not just about assuming that Nigerians will want to let bygone be bygone. Where do we begin to pass this message? Whose responsibility is it to pass this message across? And how effectively are they doing it?
Number one, it starts with the leadership. And that's why if this administration is really sincere about change, they must be transparent in what they do. Other ethnic and religious groups must never perceive that they are being, or they are not being favored, or they are being excluded. And that's one of the things that Lee Kuan Yew said. He said, when I took office in 1965 as a free, independent Singapore, he says, during my campaign, a Malay woman raised the hand of her child and used that hand to wave at me. Lee Kuan Yew said that when I saw that Malay woman wave the hand of her child at me, that Malay woman understood clearly that Lee Kuan Yew will defend, even though he's of Chinese descent, he would defend the interest of that Malay child. And today, that is true. So it starts with the top leadership. All our gestures must never give the wrong impression that we are not building one nation bound in freedom, peace, and unity, where every tribe, every religion, every group is significant. And so I think it starts with the top leadership. But it also we also at our individual level must get away from attitudes and gestures that send the wrong message to our neighbors that we don't like them or whatever. So I think it's a collective responsibility. Yeah,
that's very interesting.
Driven from the top.
The issue of perception there really plays a huge role, because I'm saying to myself, let's assume this administration gets it right. Is that enough to wipe the slate clean? Is that enough to open up a new book and for the Yoruba man to see the Igbo man as a brother and the Igbo man to see the Hausa man as a brother, because we have been divided across these lines for a very, very long time. So I have a feeling that there are those who, even if, you know, you get to indict corrupt politicians from across these tribes, there are those who will still pick a bone with it. When I asked about whose responsibility is it to pass across a message, I was going to ask, how closely is your institute working with the traditional institutions, talk about, of course, our educational institutions, in passing these messages across to the younger ones, you know, to correct that mindset? Because you just talk about the issue of orientation. We have lived in a time where it's acceptable to not have a certain degree, get into power. In fact, politics has become a career. Someone teased the other day and said there are those in Nigeria who say, when you ask, what do you do for a living? And they say, I'm a professional politician. And many wonder what that means. You know, so my point is, how well are you working with the educational institutions for the younger generation to understand that it is unacceptable to abuse power, that it is unacceptable to support those who abuse power? Where are we starting this reorientation from?
As an institute, remember it's a private sector initiative, and we are really not well funded in the sense that we want our message to remain pure and unbiased. But we have had training for many government agencies. We have had training, for example, for the top Navy officers, some Air Force officers, National Planning Commission, and the feedback has been very positive. And these trainings are across ethnic, religious, tribal boundaries.
No, Professor, I hear that, but I'm asking, are you working closely with the younger generation? You do understand the importance of drawing the younger generation into this new vision of change. There are those who say one cannot learn to be left-handed in old age. If we keep on, of course, you know, drawing the older generation in, this new leaders we want, most of them are actually set in their ways. In as much as they might listen, it doesn't mean they're going to move away from what they've always believed in. But then these, in quote, leaders of tomorrow that we keep talking about, who is talking to them? Who is telling them that what they see today is not the way to go?
Actually, we are raising what I call champions. You know, the terrain is very broad. The spheres that we need to penetrate is quite broad. So what we are doing is identifying people that have passion to take this message to different spheres. And we already have a group who have actually been reaching out to the youth. I personally spend quite a lot of time with the youth. I do at least 3 or 4 trainings for them every year. But we also have a group that specifically target them. I must be honest with you, it's an enormous task. And unless we get partnerships from both private and government sector, the work is quite enormous, but we are not giving up.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. That's a very positive note there. I've been speaking with Vincent Anigbogu, Director General of the Institute for National Transformation.